My name is Julia Whitaker. I'm 33 years old, and I never thought that choosing compassion would lead to being cast out into a snowstorm with my two children. It happened just 7 months after my divorce forced us to move back into my parents' farmhouse outside Laramie, Wyoming. One icy evening, a bleeding stranger staggered onto our front porch. Despite my father's furious protests and my mother's withering glare, my instincts as a nurse took over. What I didn't know then was that helping this injured man would cost us our home that very night, or that the stranger lying unconscious on our kitchen floor would alter our lives forever. But before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever risked everything just to do what felt right. Just 4 years ago, I was thriving in St. Louis, working full-time as a pediatric nurse, a career I had dreamed of since my undergrad days. I loved the kids, the energy, the feeling that I made a difference. Then came Jordan, a marketing consultant who swept me up with smooth words and promises of forever. Within months, we were married, and soon after, I was pregnant with Ava. When Jordan accepted a promotion in Denver, I left my job to support him. 2 years later came Miles, and for a while, our family felt whole. That illusion shattered when I found the hotel receipts and flirty messages. The affair had lasted nearly a year. Worse, Jordan had emptied our joint savings into a private account. When I called my mother, Margaret, asking if we could come home, she didn't offer comfort, just cold judgment. You always were naive, Julia. Their remote farmhouse, surrounded by pastures and windbreaks, had once felt like freedom during my childhood. Now, it felt like a cage. My father, Walter, quickly reimposed his strict order. No loud voices, dinner at 6 sharp, lights out by 8 p.m. Ava, my dreamy 8-year-old with chestnut curls, retreated inward. She spent hours drawing our old apartment, filling it with stars and laughter, even though it had been a 1-bedroom walk-up. When I tried to ease her sadness, my mother's sharp voice cut in. Your kids need structure, Julia. Something you clearly failed to give them. But none of that compared to what happened the night we opened the door to a stranger, and the world turned upside down. Miles, just 5 years old and full of restless energy, struggled the most under my father's rigid expectations. His loud laughter and need to move often landed him in timeouts, followed by stern lectures about what a young man should be. To protect his spirit, I took Ava and Miles outside to the barn or the frozen pasture whenever the weather allowed, just to let them run and breathe. Those moments were our saving grace, brief, stolen pockets of freedom away from the tension saturating the farmhouse. You're letting them run wild, my mother, Margaret, snapped one afternoon, watching Miles dash through the brittle grass with his arms stretched like wings. Just like you used to. She wasn't wrong. I had always been the odd one, emotional, idealistic, the child who never quite fit into her practical, hardline family. From the time I could walk, I was drawn to anything broken or wounded. I once brought a freezing kitten home in my coat, nursed a sparrow back to life, and spent one entire July bottle feeding a calf abandoned by its mother. My mother dismissed it all as a stray animal phase, something I'd outgrow. I never did. That compassion led me to nursing school, and eventually into pediatric care. Even as a child, I looked after the left-out kids, the bullied, the hungry. I'd sit with the lonely at lunch and speak up when others stayed silent. My parents saw these things not as strength, but as weakness. The world will crush a soft heart, my father Walter warned more than once. Maybe that's why Jordan's betrayal hurt so badly. It wasn't just the loss of a marriage. It was confirmation of every cynical thing they'd ever told me. Returning to this house at 33 felt like stepping backward into a mold I'd fought so hard to break. Each morning, I walked a mile through snowdrifts to the library in town, searching job boards for nursing work within reach. Every night, I returned to Walter's scowl when I came home empty-handed. Healthcare jobs don't grow on trees around here, I said one night, trying to mask my exhaustion. Missoula might be the only option, but that's 2 hours away. And who's going to raise your kids while you chase jobs across the state? Margaret shot back. Don't look at us. We've done our part. They wouldn't help with childcare, but expected miracles from me. The hypocrisy was constant. Then winter deepened. By mid-December, the valley was buried in snow. The dirt road vanished beneath ice-packed drifts, and the wind howled like a beast against the walls. On December 15th, the worst storm of the year struck. That night, as the windows frosted over and the roof groaned beneath the weight of the storm, everything changed. None of us knew it yet, but a bleeding man on our porch would become the turning point we never saw coming. My father, Walter, had spent the afternoon bracing the barn, double-checking that the livestock were secure and the feed was dry. Meanwhile, Margaret busied herself filling water containers and stocking the pantry with canned goods, muttering about the power lines and how unreliable they were during storms like this. Upstairs, I tucked Ava and Miles into bed early. I read them 3 stories instead of the usual one, trying to distract them from the wind's roar as it rattled the windows and groaned through the rafters. Miles finally drifted off, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Ava, her eyes wide, whispered, "Are we going to be okay, Mommy?" before sleep claimed her too. I smoothed her curls and whispered, "This old house has stood 100 winters, sweetheart. We'll be just fine." Downstairs, my parents had settled into their nightly routine. Walter dozed in his recliner, arms crossed, while Margaret sat knitting under the lamplight, her needles clicking in time with the storm's rhythm. I curled into the window seat with a worn nursing journal, desperate to keep my mind and skills sharp, even after all these months away from the hospital. When the grandfather clock struck 9, a sound cut through the wind, a dull, thudding noise on the front porch. Faint, but distinct. Margaret didn't even glance up. "Probably a branch," she said flatly, resuming her knitting. But something about it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the brittle snap of wood or a piece of debris skittering across the porch. It was heavier, more human. I pushed the journal aside and stepped to the frosted window. I had to wipe the glass with my sleeve to see through the ice. That's when I saw it. A shape, crumpled and motionless, lying on the porch. Not a tree limb, not debris. A person. "Dad!" I shouted, already unlocking the deadbolt. "Someone's out there!" Walter stirred, blinking against the lamplight as I pulled the door open. The wind roared in instantly, spraying snow across the hardwood floor. And there he was, face down on the porch, snow crusted on his back, his black coat soaked through. His cowboy hat lay nearby, half buried in a snowdrift. A dark red stain bloomed beneath him. "He's bleeding!" I yelled, already at his side. Walter appeared behind me, flashlight in hand. "Julia, stop! We don't know who this man is." But I was already turning him gently, my fingers searching for signs of life. He looked to be in his late 30s, unshaven and pale, his face contorted in pain. His skin was like ice. When I pulled back his coat, I found the wound. Gunshot, left side, bleeding slowly. "He's been shot," I said, my training taking over. "And he's hypothermic. We have to get him inside, now." Walter hesitated in the doorway, rooted by fear and stubborn pride. But I wouldn't let this man die. Not on our porch. Not tonight. "We need to call someone," Walter muttered. "Dad, he'll die before help gets here in this storm. Please, help me now." The man's eyes fluttered open, locking onto mine with startling clarity given his condition. "Please," he whispered hoarsely. "Help!" That single word jolted Walter from his hesitation. Together, we hoisted the stranger and carried him inside, snow melting off his coat and puddling on the floor. Margaret's voice sliced through the moment. "Walter, what are you doing bringing him in here? He could be anyone." "He's injured, Mom," I shot back, clearing space on the kitchen table. "We don't have time." "Get me towels and the first aid kit from the bathroom." She didn't move. "He could be dangerous, a criminal, even, and your children are sleeping upstairs." "He's barely alive," I snapped, cutting through his blood-soaked shirt with the kitchen scissors. "The only danger is if we don't help." The wound was a clean through and through just above his left hip. No shattered bone, but the bleeding was significant. I applied pressure while barking instructions to Walter. "Boil water, bring blankets." Margaret stood frozen, torn between fear and judgment. Finally, Walter spoke with quiet steel. "Margaret, either help or sit down." With a tight-lipped sigh, she retrieved the kit, muttering about bringing trouble into our home. I worked fast, cleaning the wound, dabbing antiseptic, prepping sutures. The man drifted in and out of consciousness, groaning, but not resisting. As I checked for other injuries, more items tumbled from his coat. A sleek satellite phone unlike anything I'd seen, a brushed metal card with no markings, and a small thumb drive strung on a cord around his neck. Walter picked up the satellite phone, squinting at it. "This isn't ranch hand gear." "Who is he?" I murmured. Suddenly, the man's hand clamped around my wrist with surprising force. His eyes, now fully open, locked onto mine, ice blue and filled with urgency. "They're coming," he rasped. "Don't call anyone. Not safe." "Who's coming?" I asked, leaning in, but his eyelids drooped again, and he slipped back under. Walter reached for the landline. "I'm calling Sheriff Tanner. We need to report this." "No!" The man's eyes snapped open, panic flooding his expression. "Please! No authorities. They'll find me." He struggled to speak, his breath labored. "Just give me 24 hours." I hesitated, heart racing. Snow battered the windows. Miles and Ava slept above us. In here, lying on our kitchen table, was a man whose presence could change everything. I looked at my father. "We wait. Just give me 24 hours, the man rasped again. My mother stepped forward, arms folded tightly across her chest. "Walter, this man is clearly involved in something illegal. I want him out of my house." I finished securing the gauze over his stitched wound before answering. "We can't send him back into a blizzard. He'll die out there." "That's not our problem," she snapped. "For all we know, whoever shot him could be tracking him. Here. Do you really want to expose Ava and Miles to that kind of danger?" The stranger, now slightly propped on one elbow, looked pale but determined. "Ma'am, I promise. I'm not a criminal. I'll explain everything once I'm stable, but please, calling the police right now would endanger everyone in this house." Walter hovered near the phone, silent for a moment. "You've got 5 minutes, he said finally. "Convince me not to make this call." The man sagged back, clearly spent. "My name is Jackson. I own property about 10 miles west, up in Elk Ridge. I was inspecting a new site when I was ambushed. It's corporate, industrial espionage. That's all I can safely say for now." It sounded like something out of a thriller novel, not the kind of thing that happened in rural Wyoming. Judging by Margaret's scoff, she thought the same. "You expect us to buy that?" she demanded. Jackson didn't even open his eyes. "No," he murmured, "but I'm asking you to trust me. Just until morning." I finished bandaging him and gently helped him ease upright. "He's lost a lot of blood. He needs rest and warmth. Please." Walter and Margaret exchanged one of those long, silent looks, decades of married code embedded in their eyes. Finally, Walter sighed. "He stays on the couch, just until morning, then he goes, or I make the call. No debate." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. With my father's help, we got Jackson settled on the living room couch. I covered him with quilts and used what supplies I had from my old nursing kit to start a saline drip. Within minutes, his breathing slowed into a fitful sleep. Later, as I slipped into the hallway, Margaret cornered me. Her voice was a hiss. "Have you lost your mind? Bringing a gunshot victim into this house without calling the authorities?" I kept my tone even. I wasn't going to let someone die on our porch. "Your job," she snapped, "isn't to save strangers. It's to protect your children. This isn't one of your injured birds, Julia. This is a man, and he's dragging danger into our home." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm monitoring him. The second there's any sign of danger, I'll wake Dad and we'll handle it. But I'm not throwing an injured man back into a blizzard to die." Margaret shook her head, disappointment carving deep lines into her face. "You never learn, Julia. Always taking in strays, always trusting too easily. Look where that got you with Jordan." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. Jackson wasn't Jordan, and helping a bleeding stranger survive the night wasn't the same as trusting a man who'd lied for years. I didn't argue further. There was no use. Instead, I returned to the living room where Jackson lay, still unconscious, unaware that the real battle was just beginning. Morning came with skies clearing to icy blue. Temperatures remained bitter, hovering just above zero. I had spent most of the night in the armchair beside him, nodding off in brief intervals, waking regularly to check his vitals and change his IV. Jackson's breathing had steadied. His color had improved. The fever had come down with acetaminophen. I was checking his dressings when Walter and Margaret entered, both already dressed, coats draped over their arms. Their matching expressions left no room for discussion. "He needs to go," Walter announced bluntly. "The storm's over. Roads will be cleared by midday." Jackson, barely propped up against the couch pillows, opened his eyes. "I understand," he said, his voice raspy. "I've already overstayed." I stared at my parents. "He can't even sit up without help. His wound could rupture with any movement." "That's not our concern," Margaret replied coolly. "We've done our Christian duty, offered shelter through the night." "Christian duty?" I echoed, incredulous. "Is that what you call the bare minimum of decency?" Walter's tone sharpened. "Watch yourself, Julia. This is our home. We've made our decision." I stood up fully, positioning myself between them and Jackson. "He needs at least another day, maybe more. He's in no condition to travel." "Then you can drive him to Missoula," Margaret snapped. "Let a hospital take responsibility." Jackson struggled to rise, grimacing. "Please, don't argue. I'll manage. I just need to get to my land." "You're not going anywhere," I said, gently guiding him back down. "You've lost too much blood. You won't make it 10 miles. Walter stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Julia, a word. In the kitchen. Now." I squared my shoulders. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready for it. I followed Walter into the kitchen reluctantly, glancing back just once at Jackson. He was watching us go, his expression tight, not from pain, but something deeper. Guilt, sadness, maybe both. Inside, my parents stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an immovable wall across the kitchen table. "This ends now," Walter said. "That man leaves today. One way or another." I folded my arms. "Based on what? Your gut instinct? He's wounded and weak. He needs care." "Based on 30 years of watching you make the same reckless choices," Margaret snapped. "You drag in every lost cause, Julia, every stray. You always think you're saving someone." "He's a person, not a stray dog," I said firmly. "He's a gunshot victim who refuses police involvement." Walter shot back. "That's not normal. Use your head. For once." The argument escalated quickly, voices rising, sharp edges in every word. Margaret dredged up every mistake I'd ever made, from befriending a rebellious boy in middle school to marrying Jordan after 6 months of whirlwind romance. "And look where your bleeding heart got you," she hissed. "Divorced, broke, living under our roof again because you can't survive on your own." Her words hit a nerve. I felt it crack, the part of me still healing from everything I'd lost. "That's not fair." "Life's not fair," Walter said coldly. "It's about making smart choices. You don't." Then came a small voice from behind. "Mommy?" I turned to see Ava standing in the doorway in her flannel pajamas, Miles peeking out from behind her. Their faces were pale and confused. "Why is everyone yelling?" Miles whispered, his thumb edging toward his mouth, a habit he'd kicked months ago. I walked toward them, forcing a smile. "It's okay, sweethearts. We're just having a grown-up conversation." "About the hurt man?" Ava asked softly, eyes searching mine. Before I could answer, Margaret stepped in. "Yes, about the stranger your mother brought in, without thinking about your safety." I spun around. "Don't involve them in this." "They're already involved," she snapped, "because once again, your need to rescue someone is putting them at risk." Something inside me snapped. Years of quiet restraint buckled under the weight. "My children are my world," I said, voice trembling. "Everything I do, including helping others, is to show them what compassion looks like. What kind of mother would I be if I taught them to turn away from someone in pain?" A shuffle interrupted us. Jackson stood in the doorway, bracing himself against the frame. "Please," he said quietly, "this argument, it's not worth it." I'll go right now, Jackson said, voice strained but calm. Margaret looked at him with open contempt before turning back to me. It's him or us, Julia. Make your choice. What? I blinked at her, stunned. You heard me, she said without hesitation. If you're so determined to risk everything for this man, then do it elsewhere, not in our home. I turned to Walter, hoping, desperately, that he would soften her words. But his expression was hard, unyielding. You can't be serious, I whispered. Dead serious, he replied. We've supported you through one poor decision after another. This is the line. Ava gripped my hand tighter, and Miles leaned against my leg. Confused and frightened, Jackson attempted to speak again. Ma'am, sir, please, don't do this. I'll go. You don't have to. You always choose strays over family, Margaret snapped, cutting him off. You always have. And you always will. Well, this time, you face the consequences. The children began to cry, sensing more than they understood. I crouched down and wrapped them both in my arms, trying to shield them from the emotional wreckage exploding around us. You have 30 minutes to pack, Walter said, and the man goes with you. I don't want him on my land another hour. Dad, it's 15 degrees outside, I pleaded. Where are we supposed to go? You should have thought of that before you defied us in our own home. There was no room for negotiation. No amount of pleading softened their stance. Numb, I packed quickly. Warm clothes for Ava and Miles, their favorite toys, winter boots, medications. Jackson insisted on helping, despite his obvious pain, holding open bags and murmuring, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. No, I said quietly, stuffing gloves into a side pocket. This has been coming for years. You're just the spark. 25 minutes later, we stood by the front door. The kids were bundled tightly, our bags at our feet. Walter and Margaret stood in the living room, unmoved. You're making a terrible mistake, I told them, voice cracking despite everything I'd tried to hold in. You're pushing away your daughter and your grandchildren. The mistake was letting you come back, Margaret said coldly. Clearly, you learned nothing from that failed marriage. I turned away, throat burning. With Jackson leaning into me for support and my children's hands wrapped in mine, I opened the door. The cold slammed into us like a wall, and behind us, the door shut and locked, with chilling, final certainty. The temperature on the dashboard blinked 12 degrees as I helped Jackson into the passenger seat of my aging Subaru. Ava and Miles huddled in the back seat, wrapped in every blanket I had managed to stuff into the bags. Their noses were pink and their eyes wide. Where are we going, Mommy? Ava asked, her voice trembling. I forced steadiness into mine. We're heading into Laramie. We'll find a cozy motel, have some hot chocolate. It'll be an adventure. Miles's bottom lip quivered. I forgot Spike, his beloved stuffed dinosaur. I hadn't grabbed it in the scramble. My heart clenched. We'll get a new one, I promised, knowing full well I didn't even have enough in my account to cover a night at a decent motel, let alone a toy. I backed the car slowly down the long, unplowed ranch driveway, the wheels crunching over snowdrifts nearly 2 feet deep. I eased it into drive, tires spinning before catching traction. The road to town felt impossibly far. I'm so sorry, Jackson murmured. I never meant to bring this on you. This isn't on you, I said, eyes locked on the path ahead. My parents and I were always on borrowed time. If it hadn't been this, it would have been something else. We made it halfway down the driveway before the wheels gave out, sliding into a drift and burying themselves. I shifted into reverse, tried to rock the car free, but the tires only dug deeper. No, 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 I muttered, panic rising as the car whined and shuddered. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel, swallowing the lump in my throat. Miles whimpered softly behind me. My phone blinked. No service. Cell towers were probably still iced over from the storm. Julia, Jackson said gently, cutting through my panic. I have a cabin, about 3 miles east, near Rock Creek. It's stocked. If we can get there, we'll be okay. 3 miles? In this cold? I asked, turning to him. With kids? He nodded and held up the sleek satellite phone I'd seen before. I can call for help, but it could take hours. The walk might be our best shot. The options were grim. Stay here and hope someone passed, walk back and beg my parents for mercy, or trust Jackson. Is your place livable? I asked. A faint smile broke through his pale face. Very much so. I turned to the kids. We're going to take a snowy walk, okay? Their eyes were scared, but they nodded, brave and trusting. We bundled up as best we could. I wrapped my wool scarf around Miles and gave my thickest gloves to Ava, pulling her hat down snug over her ears. Jackson assured me he could walk with support, but the tight set of his jaw and the way he winced with every step told another story. The journey was grueling. I carried Miles when the snow got too deep for his little legs, while Ava trudged beside me, sometimes reaching out to steady Jackson on his good side. The wind had picked up again, stinging our cheeks and pushing us sideways with sharp gusts that whipped through the frozen fields. After what felt like hours, Jackson raised a trembling hand and pointed toward a dense grove of pines ahead. "Through there," he said, breath clouding in the air. "We're close." I expected a small hunting lodge or a modest wood cabin. What rose through the trees made me stop short. It was a striking modern home, glass and timber rising from the snowy earth like it belonged there, bold and serene. "This is your place?" I asked in disbelief. Jackson nodded and led us to a discreet panel built into the outer wall. He entered a code, and the sleek door slid open with a whisper. "Welcome to my Wyoming retreat," he said simply. Inside, it was stunning. Vaulted ceilings, panoramic windows with views of white-capped mountains, and a massive stone fireplace warming the wide-open space. Clean lines, minimal furniture, soft rugs. Not just comfort, luxury. "Wow," Ava breathed, spinning slowly in wonder. I helped Jackson to a deep leather couch, my mind racing as I took in our surroundings. This wasn't the life of a ranch hand or a drifter. "Who are you?" I asked, checking his bandage. He winced, sighing. "I should have told you the truth. My full name is Jackson Montgomery. I founded Montgomery Tech Solutions 15 years ago." I froze. Montgomery Tech, one of the biggest names in cybersecurity. Their tech-powered encrypted communications across government agencies and Fortune 500 companies. "You're that Jackson Montgomery?" He nodded, almost sheepishly. "I keep a low profile here. This place reminds me who I was before all that." "And the cowboy look?" A faint smile. "Not fake. I grew up on a ranch outside Rawlins. Put myself through college riding fences. The company came later. But this," he gestured down at his worn boots, "this is still me." I eased into a chair, mind spinning, while Ava and Miles explored the room. "The men who shot you," I asked carefully, "were they after your tech?" "Industrial espionage," Jackson said again, his voice quiet but clear. "My company is developing a next-generation communication system, completely secure, impossible to intercept. A few powerful competitors would do anything to stop it from reaching the market." He winced slightly, shifting on the couch. "I was at this property inspecting updates to the security infrastructure when they hit. I got away, but not before one of them fired." "Why not go to the authorities?" I asked. His jaw tensed. "Because I don't know who's compromised. These aren't just rival companies. They have money, connections. They could have people planted anywhere." He paused. I needed time to contact my own security team, directly and securely. Almost on cue, the satellite phone buzzed on the coffee table. Jackson picked it up, speaking quickly, detailing his condition, our location, and requesting immediate backup. After he ended the call, he leaned back with a sigh of relief. "They'll be here in 4 hours. We'll be safe now." For the first time since leaving my parents' house, the knot in my chest loosened just a little. In the cabin's bright, warm kitchen, I found cocoa mix and a stockpile of supplies. I made Ava and Miles mugs of hot chocolate. They curled up near the fireplace, finally relaxed, tiny marshmallows melting in their hands. I found myself worrying, though, not about us, but about Walter and Margaret, still alone in the freezing ranch house. Jackson, somehow sensing my unease, spoke. "Would you like someone to check on them?" Quietly? His offer surprised me. "Yes, please, just to make sure they're okay." He made another call. 20 minutes later, a local contact confirmed lights on inside, smoke rising from the chimney. My parents were fine, physically, at least. By the time twilight fell, the kids were yawning. Jackson led us to guest rooms that felt more like luxury suites, plush bedding, radiant heat, soft lighting. After tucking them in, I returned to the living room, where Jackson stood by the massive windows, snow softly falling outside. "Thank you," I said gently, standing beside him, "for giving us shelter." He turned, eyes serious. "You saved my life, at great personal cost. You didn't have to. I did what anyone decent would do." "No," he replied firmly. "You did what few would, especially when your parents forced a choice." We stood in silence, watching the snow. Then he asked softly, "What will you do now?" The question settled heavily between us. I had no home, no job, almost no money, and 2 children looking to me for everything. "I don't know," I said honestly. If this moment stirred something in you, if you've ever faced the unknown with nothing but courage and love, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next when Julia's journey takes an unexpected turn. And yet, strangely, I felt freer than I had in months. "I guess I'll look for a place to rent in Laramie," I said quietly. "Keep applying for nursing jobs. Try to start over." Jackson nodded. "Starting over can be terrifying," he said. "But sometimes it's also liberating." There was a note in his voice. Familiar. Personal. "Did you have to start over once?" I asked. A flicker of pain crossed his face. "After my wife passed, 5 years ago. Cancer." I felt a jolt of empathy. "I'm so sorry." He gave a soft, wistful smile. "I buried myself in work, built Montgomery Tech into what it is now. But somewhere in that process, I lost myself too." We sat by the fire as the snow deepened outside, our conversation stretching across the hours. No romance, just a quiet understanding. We knew what it meant to lose something you thought would last forever, to build again from what little remained. By the time headlights appeared through the trees, I realized I didn't feel broken anymore, just open. 2 unmarked SUVs arrived at dawn, headlights slicing through the icy mist. Jackson's security team moved like professionals, swift, silent, precise. Their leader, Marcus, checked the perimeter, while a medic named Sarah began examining Jackson's injury. "You did a great job with these stitches," Sarah said after inspecting my work. "Clean and even. Very little scarring, most likely." Was a pediatric nurse," I said, catching myself. Sarah nodded. "Well, you probably saved his life. Between the wound and the exposure, he wouldn't have made it without you." Ava and Miles were entranced by the team. Marcus produced 2 chocolate bars from his vest, handing them over with a wink. Ava asked about his gear and missions. Miles clutched the chocolate like treasure. "Your kids are incredible," Jackson said, watching from the couch, freshly bandaged. "You've done an amazing job, especially with everything you've gone through." Warmth flooded my chest. After months of being told I was failing them, those words meant more than he could have known. "They're resilient," I said. "But I worry. All this change." "Kids don't need perfection," he said simply. "They need to know they're safe and loved. And with you, they clearly do." Throughout the day, I kept waiting for some change in Jackson. A shift into arrogance, entitlement, the mask of a billionaire. But it never came. The man who'd collapsed on my parents' porch was the same one quietly sipping tea beside the fire. Grounded, honest, real. Jackson spoke to Ava and Miles with a quiet warmth that never felt forced or condescending. He asked them questions, remembered their answers, and gave them his full attention, something my parents never quite managed. He treated his security team with respect, too, not as hired muscle, but as trusted professionals. When Ava accidentally spilled juice across a pale woven rug that looked far too expensive for comfort, I rushed to blot it, apologizing over and over. Jackson simply waved me off. "It's just a thing," he said. "Things can be replaced." By the second day, we'd settled into a rhythm. The security team patrolled outside with calm efficiency, while inside, the cabin became a haven. Jackson was walking more, still careful, but no longer grimacing with every step. Ava had claimed the wide window seat as her reading nook, while Miles built sprawling block cities on the living room rug. Still, despite the comfort, I found myself staring east more than once, toward the old ranch house, toward Walter and Margaret. "You're worried about them," Jackson said gently, not a question. I nodded. "They were wrong, but they're still my parents. I hate how we left it. Would you like to call? The satellite phone can connect to their landline." I hesitated, then shook my head. "Not yet. They need time. And so do I." That night, after the kids were tucked into their cozy guest rooms, Jackson and I sat near the fire again, trading pieces of our stories. "How does a ranch kid from Wyoming become a tech billionaire?" I asked with a smile. He chuckled. "I was always the weird one. Took apart radios, rebuilt old computers. My dad thought it was nonsense, said I was wasting time when I should have been working cattle. But you saw something bigger?" "I love the ranch," he said, his voice soft. "Still do. But I also saw how technology could change things, make work smarter, safer. I went to school on a scholarship, studied engineering, worked ranch jobs on weekends to survive. And then," I teased, "you became a billionaire." He laughed. "Hardly that easy. My first startup crashed. Second limped along. Montgomery Tech was attempt number 3. What made that one work?" He paused, gaze steady. "Learning to accept help. My biggest mistake was thinking I had to prove I could do it all alone. That kind of pride? It nearly broke me." I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of that settle deep in my bones, because I knew that feeling too. His words hit deeper than I expected. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been doing? Trying to prove I could manage everything on my own, refusing help even when it meant stretching myself thin and leaving Ava and Miles caught in the fallout? "That's hard," I admitted quietly. "Accepting help sometimes feels like admitting I've failed." Jackson nodded. "Believe me, I understand. When my wife got sick, I tried to juggle it all. Running a company, caring for her, suppressing my own grief. I thought I had to be strong, for everyone. Nearly drove myself into the ground until a friend staged a full-blown intervention. We talked for hours that evening about resilience and pressure, love and loss. I told him how nursing had once filled me with joy, how Jordan's betrayal had hollowed me out, and how returning to my parents' house had felt like stepping back into a life that no longer fit. He listened, really listened. No judgment, no fixing, just presence. By the third day, Jackson was walking more freely, though Sarah still cautioned him against overdoing it. His security team had been efficient and discreet. They'd handed over 2 corporate spies to federal agents, backed by solid evidence from Jackson's own internal systems. "You're safe now," I told him that afternoon. But the words, instead of bringing closure, made my heart ache. The idea of leaving this place, this temporary haven, felt heavier than expected. "Actually," Jackson said, tone careful, "there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." He explained that his foundation, the Montgomery Rural Healthcare Initiative, was launching a new center in downtown Laramie. They were looking for a local director. "It's a real position," he said. "Good salary, flexible hours, and I think you'd be perfect for it." I stared at him, unsure. "Is this a real job? Or are you inventing something to ease your conscience?" His gaze stayed steady. "The foundation's been in the works for over a year. The building is already purchased. The job's real, and you're more than qualified. But you wouldn't have offered it if I hadn't saved you." "True," he said. "I wouldn't have known you existed. But now that I do, I see someone with integrity, compassion, and grit. This isn't charity. It's opportunity." His words landed with uncomfortable clarity. Was I refusing this simply because it didn't come through struggle? "I'll think about it," I said. That night, I lay awake, turning it over in my mind. Jackson's offer meant more than a paycheck. It meant freedom. A new start, on my terms. Still, the idea of accepting felt dangerously close to depending on another man. After I'd fought so hard to reclaim myself following Jordan's betrayal. But by morning, clarity had settled in. I found Jackson at the kitchen island, sipping coffee and reviewing a tablet of security updates. I'll take the job, I said, walking in, but on one condition. He looked up, brow raised. Which is? I want to go through the official process. Application, interview, everything. No shortcuts, no special treatment. I met his gaze steadily. I need to know I earned it. A slow smile tugged at his lips. Julia, I wouldn't have it any other way. 1 week after Jackson had collapsed on my parents' porch, the skies finally cleared. The sun rose over a snowy Wyoming landscape under brilliant blue. County plows had made the main roads passable, and the temperature had climbed to a relatively warm 25 degrees. I think it's time, I said to Jackson as we stood near the window, watching Ava and Miles roll snow into a lopsided snowman with Marcus's help. I need to talk to my parents, face them properly. He nodded. Would you like company? I hesitated, then smiled. Yes, I would. Sarah stayed behind with the kids while Jackson and I borrowed one of the team's vehicles, a quiet, capable SUV, far more reliable than my weather-worn sedan, now thawing in Jackson's garage. As we neared the ranch, my stomach knotted. I hadn't been back since that morning, hadn't heard from them. Jackson must have sensed the shift in my posture. Just remember, he said gently, you're not asking for anything. You're setting boundaries. I nodded. We'd rehearsed what I needed to say. Clear, calm, and firm. But even with all the preparation, years of conditioning tightened my throat as Walter and Margaret opened the front door. Surprise, relief, and unspoken resentment flashed across their faces. Julia, my mother said finally, her tone clipped. We were wondering when we'd hear from you. May we come in? I asked, voice steady. They stepped aside. The house looked exactly the same, down to the worn rug in the entry, but something inside me had shifted. This was no longer my home. In the living room, Walter's eyes narrowed as he looked Jackson over. You're looking remarkably well for a man on death's door. Thanks to your daughter's care, Jackson replied evenly. She likely saved my life. The silence that followed was thick. I took a breath, steadying myself, and began. I came here to set some things straight, I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. First, Ava, Miles, and I are safe. We found a place to live, and I've accepted a position with the Montgomery Rural Healthcare Initiative. My mother's eyes narrowed instantly. Montgomery? Wait, don't tell me you're… Jackson Montgomery, Jackson said, stepping forward and extending a hand. Founder of Montgomery Tech Solutions. Your daughter didn't know who I was when she treated my injury, he continued. She helped me simply because I needed it, not because of my name or what I could offer. Walter didn't take the offered hand. He folded his arms. So you've latched onto a wealthy benefactor. How convenient. That jab might have gutted me once, but not today. That's exactly the kind of thinking I came here to address, I replied calmly. I accepted a position based on my qualifications. My relationship with Jackson is professional and built on mutual respect, which is more than I've received from this house lately. Respect is earned, Margaret said sharply. And throwing your daughter and grandchildren out into a snowstorm doesn't qualify, I answered. Walter's jaw tightened. You chose a stranger over family. I chose compassion over cruelty, I said, my voice quiet but resolute. And I'd make the same choice again. Jackson stood beside me in silence. He could have stepped in, could have dominated the room with his presence. But he didn't. He let it be my moment. That spoke volumes. The children miss you, I continued, softening my tone. Despite everything, you're still their grandparents. I'm open to rebuilding something, but it has to come with boundaries and mutual respect. Margaret's expression flickered, conflict in her eyes. The children are doing well? She asked. They're thriving, I said. Miles started kindergarten this week. Ava loves her new school. Walter cleared his throat. Where are you living? I found a rental in town, 3 bedrooms, close to the schools, and my new job. I left out that Jackson's foundation had helped facilitate the rental, knowing it would only reignite their defensiveness. The conversation was tense, careful, but it didn't explode like I feared. No screaming, no tears, just hard truths and the beginning of something different. By the time we left, No apologies had been exchanged, no hugs or promises, but a fragile truce had taken shape. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, something we could build on. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a foundation. One that, over time, might support something real. As we drove away from the ranch, Jackson glanced at me from the driver's seat. "You did well." I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "It's a start." The weeks that followed moved in a blur of purpose. I formally interviewed for the position at the Montgomery Rural Healthcare Initiative, presenting my background in pediatric nursing, familiarity with the local population, and vision for community-based outreach. The board responded warmly. The offer came 2 days later. It was everything I needed: meaningful work, flexible hours, and enough income to support Ava, Miles, and myself, without relying on anyone. The rental house Jackson had helped us find turned out to be a dream. A cozy 3-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street within walking distance of both schools. The landlord, a board member, offered fair rent and waived the usual security deposit, easing the transition. Ava quickly found her stride, embraced by a school that encouraged her creativity. Miles thrived under the guidance of a patient kindergarten teacher who saw his high energy as a gift, not a problem. Jackson remained part of our lives, never imposing, always respectful. He stopped by the Foundation's offices during his visits to Wyoming and occasionally joined us for weekend hikes or dinners. The children adored him, especially after he gave Miles a replacement for his lost dinosaur. Not just a plush toy, but a carefully crafted replica. The gesture brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't grand. It was intentional. My parents began calling weekly. The first few conversations were awkward, but over time, they softened. We even met for lunch at a local diner, neutral ground. They listened. They asked about the kids. They didn't criticize. It was more than I expected. Then, one crisp evening in late February, Jackson invited us for dinner at his Montana retreat. Ava and Miles dashed ahead as soon as we arrived, eager to see Marcus and Sarah, now honorary uncle and aunt. "I have some news," Jackson said after dessert. "The Foundation just secured funding to expand sooner than planned. We'll be opening 3 satellite clinics in underserved parts of the county." "That's incredible," I said. "The need is so great." He smiled. "The board was especially impressed with your mobile pediatric clinic proposal. It's been approved. We launch next month." Emotion swelled in my chest. "We're making a difference," I whispered. Jackson reached across the table, his hand warm over mine. "You're making a difference," he said. "I'm just giving you the space to do it." Later that night, I stood on Jackson's deck beneath a canopy of stars. The warm Montana air was thick with the scent of pine and wildflowers. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from cold, but from the weight of reflection. What a journey it had been. From dependency and judgment to stability, fulfillment, and a kind of peace I hadn't thought possible 6 months ago. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jackson's voice broke the quiet as he joined me, offering a mug of hot chocolate. I smiled, accepting it gratefully. "I was just thinking about that night. If you hadn't collapsed on my parents' porch, if I hadn't defied them to help you." We shared a quiet laugh, acknowledging the strange, almost surreal turns that had led us here. "Sometimes," Jackson said, "the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. I've gotten used to that." He looked up at the stars. "My grandfather used to say, when one door slams in your face, it's only because you were meant to find another one. Something better." The words settled in my chest. My parents' rejection had felt like disaster at the time. But maybe it had been the start of something stronger, a life built on my terms. As we stood in silence, watching the Milky Way arc across the dark sky, I felt something deeper than relief, gratitude. Not just for what Jackson had given me, but for what he had shown me. That compassion wasn't weakness. That kindness, even when inconvenient, was power. 6 months after that stormy night, summer had come to Wyoming in full bloom. The Foundation's main clinic in Laramie was thriving, and our mobile pediatric unit had visited 7 rural communities, bringing care to families who once drove hours for basic services. My office overlooked the town square where Ava and Miles played in the grass. With school out, they spent 3 days a week in the Foundation's summer program, giving me space to focus on expanding outreach. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. Jackson stood there in jeans and a light button-down, relaxed and smiling. "Got a minute?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "For the boss?" "Always," he grimaced. "Foundation board member, please. You're the boss of this clinic." It had become our routine, this easy, respectful banter. He never pulled rank, never interfered. "The mobile unit numbers look fantastic," he said, glancing at the report I'd been reading. 30% more children served than we projected. "Word travels fast in small towns," I said with a smile. "Once a few families trusted us, the rest followed." "It's more than just numbers," Jackson said, tapping the report. "They trust you. What you did at the Miller Creek outpost last month, with those hesitant parents, was remarkable." The praise hit deeper than it might have from anyone else. Jackson didn't hand out compliments lightly, which made them matter more when they came. "How are Ava and Miles handling the summer routine?" he asked, his tone casual, but the warmth behind it unmistakable. "Thriving," I said, smiling. "Ava's art teacher says she has a gift well beyond her age, and Miles, well, his swim instructor can barely keep up with him." He chuckled, and I laughed with him. The kids were flourishing in a way I hadn't seen before. Ava, once cautious and quiet under Walter and Margaret's watchful eyes, now came home buzzing about her art projects and playground stories. Miles, finally free from rigid expectations, had matured, his natural energy now channeled into sport and play with growing self-awareness. "And your parents?" Jackson's question was gentle, aware of the sensitive ground he was treading. "Better," I admitted. "They're coming for Sunday dinner. Last time, Dad played catch with Miles. No commentary, no criticism." We shared a smile, one that held the weight of every hurdle cleared. It hadn't been easy, but we'd built something real. Boundaries, respect, even a fragile kind of affection. There'd been no grand apology, but there had been effort and change. "And how are you, Julia?" he asked, his blue eyes settling on me with quiet intensity. "Really?" I paused, then nodded slowly. "I'm good. Really good. For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm where I'm meant to be, doing work that matters." And it was true. The foundation had awakened something in me, a part that loved solving problems, leading projects, helping people beyond the walls of a clinic. I was still a nurse, but I was also an advocate, a builder, a leader. The pieces of myself that had once been fractured by Jordan's betrayal and years of doubt were finally whole. "You've come a long way since that night," Jackson said quietly. "We both have," I replied. His wound had healed, physically and beyond. The men responsible were now in custody, and his company had doubled down on security. But more importantly, what had started as coincidence had become something lasting. "I have something for you," he said, placing a small velvet box on my desk. My breath caught. Inside the small box was a delicate silver key on a simple chain. "What's this?" I asked, holding it up in the porch light. Jackson smiled. "It's the key to the cabin, the one we stayed in that first night during the blizzard. I want you and the kids to consider it yours. Anytime you need a retreat. No strings, no expectations, just peace." It wasn't the cabin's value or luxury that touched me. It was what the gesture represented. Jackson understood my need for space and autonomy, yet still wanted to offer support. "Thank you," I said softly, knowing he'd hear everything I didn't say aloud. That evening, we celebrated Ava's 8th birthday in our backyard, a modest but joy-filled gathering. Jackson helped Miles set up a scavenger hunt, laughing as the kids scattered across the grass. My parents, Walter and Margaret, sat somewhat stiffly at the picnic table, but made an effort to chat with other guests. Friends from the foundation, Ava's classmates, and a few parents from school filled out the circle. It was the kind of community I had once thought impossible. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, I stepped out to the porch swing. Jackson joined me, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked with a smile. "I've been thinking about that night," I said, glancing at him. The night you collapsed on my parents' porch. How close I came to not opening the door? He nodded. Life's biggest moments don't always feel big when they arrive. They just feel impossible. I laughed quietly. My mother said I always choose strays over family. She meant it as an insult, but I've realized it's a strength. I help people, even when it's inconvenient or messy or misunderstood. That strength saved me, Jackson said, voice lower now. Not just from the gunshot or the cold, but from myself. After Eliza died, I disappeared into work, success, acquisitions. You reminded me that human connection still matters. We sat there for a long time in silence, the porch swing creaking softly beneath us. Our connection had grown carefully over the months, built not on adrenaline or crisis, but on trust, understanding, and time. Do you ever regret it? He asked, breaking the quiet. Opening the door? Helping me? I looked out toward the dark horizon. Never. Not for a second. That night didn't just change your life. It changed mine. I didn't just save a man that night. I saved myself. Jackson reached for my hand. Sometimes the people we rescue end up rescuing us too. The stars above Laramie shimmered in the clear night sky, a silent witness to everything we had both endured and become. I had lost a roof, but gained a foundation. I had lost certainty, but gained purpose. What's the biggest thing you've learned from all this? I asked gently. He looked out across the yard where the last of the streamers fluttered in the breeze. That appearances lie. Judgments miss the mark. And kindness always counts. That sometimes the bleeding cowboy and the struggling nurse are exactly what each other needs, even when they least expect it. I rested my head against his shoulder, overwhelmed by the quiet power of everything we had walked through. My parents' rejection had been cruel, but it had forced me to trust myself, to build something from nothing. Sometimes, getting thrown out into the snow is what it takes to find your true home. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening, for feeling, for remembering that kindness still matters in a world that often forgets. If you've ever been called too soft for caring or too naive for believing in second chances, I hope my journey reminded you that compassion is not a weakness. It's a quiet kind of strength. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever had to walk away from people who couldn't see your worth, or if you've ever found something beautiful after being pushed out of what you thought was home. Let's lift each other up with real stories, shared wisdom, and hard-won hope. And if you're someone who's still in the storm, still being told you're wrong for listening to your heart, I see you. Keep going. Keep showing up with love, even when it hurts. The right people, the ones who will honor your courage and meet your compassion with respect, are out there. So please hit subscribe to follow more stories like mine. Not just for the drama, but for the truth. Because somewhere out there, someone else needs to know that being kind can rewrite your whole future.